Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope everyone's having a good week from wherever you are. Tonight's program is titled Greener Pages, where we will discuss measuring emissions and alternate materials, amongst other things. My name is Irene Chan, and I am the program chair at the New York Book Forum. The New York Book Forum is a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to build bridges between the publishing world and the public, which includes booksellers, print providers, material suppliers, and book consumers. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the chat and telling us the books you're reading. We really love that. It helps us all read more, and I get a lot of great book recommendations this way, actually, so thank you. April 22nd is Earth Day, and if you've been coming to our programs regularly, you might have noticed that we usually host a program on sustainability in April. And we do this not only because Earth Day falls in this month, we do this because having conversations about sustainability is important to our industry, it's important to our communities, and to everyone who lives on this planet. Not all of us. It's important to have these conversations regularly, which we do every year in April, and maybe sometimes a little more. Sustainability does not thrive in a silo, and thank you all of us for joining tonight. So before I introduce our program participants, you may have noticed that we're all here virtually, and we encourage feedback in the chat or through emojis. There is some time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to put your questions and observations in the chat as we go along. We love participation from our audience in this way. And tonight we have a discussion with Susan Lee, Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety at Lakeside Book Company, and Claudia Pilcher, Sustainability Manager at Scholastic. Please give us a round of applause for our program participants as I hand over the virtual microphone to Claudia.
Thank you, Irene. Appreciate it, and appreciate everyone coming tonight. I think I can speak for both Susan and I when I say that sustainability is both a personal and professional passion of ours. So being in a room with a lot of people who align with that is always very exciting for us. But I have a lot of questions today, a lot to cover, and I want to be mindful of time and make sure that other people are allowed to ask their questions. So I'll kind of just jump right into it, Susan. I think it would be helpful to kind of start off the conversation and really level set with people's understanding of sustainability as it relates to emissions. So could you kind of help ground the audience in what exactly scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are, what they mean from a printer's perspective, and maybe talk a little bit about why scope 3 is such a significant challenge for people to measure emissions right now?
Such a beast for us. I'd be more than happy to. So when we talk about sustainability, obviously it has to do, and ESG has to do with our life cycle of our book, like the beginning to the end of the book. And the emissions piece of it is the scope 1 has to do with our waste, our energy, the things that we can measure, that we are in control of. Scope number 2 is things like the water. There are some pieces in there, the recycling pieces, and then you get into the scope number 3 side of it. And that is really the tough piece of it. That scope 3 has to do with potentially the end user, the transportation, the gas, the employees' transportation back and forth to work, things that we don't necessarily have control over. It might it can tie in with the suppliers, and asking our suppliers where they're at as far as their scope and their carbon footprint goes, because what they do in their carbon footprint will impact us on our carbon footprint. So it's really tying the whole package together with scope 1, 2, and 3 of everything that we can impact in scope 1 and 2, and then what is on the external forces of scope 3.
Interesting. And thank you for kind of giving that explanation. I think that was very clear. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that scope 3 piece of it, right? You mentioned that a lot of that is from downstream or upstream sorts of emitters. So for instance, partners, vendor partners. Can you speak a little bit, in your experience, what has worked kind of successfully for partners looking to engage in collecting that data, analyzing it, looking to reduce their footprint within the overall supply chain?
Well, and we talk a little bit about this as a team. In fact, my EHS team was together to have some discussions around it. For us, it's really about auditing our suppliers, asking our suppliers to fill out questionnaires. We get questions from the different publishers. They want to know what our carbon footprint is, because that's part of their scope 3. So their information, the information that we're providing to them, helps them level set on their scope 3 and their carbon footprint. It is, we could go back to having a request for our suppliers to fill out their information of scope 1 and scope 2 will help us provide us with the information for scope 3. Are the transportation piece of it, are we transporting it or are they transporting it? And if they're transporting it, it's going from our fulfillment centers to maybe their fulfillment centers, then their fulfillment centers to their retailers along the way. All of that falls into the scope 3 side of it. The paper suppliers. So I want to know what their carbon footprint is, so that because that information is buried in with our information when we're tying that in and we're using their paper to print the books on, or the inks and things like that. And then the other side of the scope 3 has to do with employee transportation. What kind of travel are we doing as far as a business goes? Where are our sales teams going? All of that will fall under the scope 3 side of it. So that's the biggest piece, because there's so much of that variation that we can't control and we don't control.
Wow. Yeah. So if I were to, try to sum up what you have just said so eloquently, it's scope 3 is a lot.
Yep.
And it's very hard to measure and very hard to capture. So it's interesting. In some of your experiences, you mentioned that you have some publishing partners, for instance, who send questionnaires, and that you meet with your vendors and partners and ask them questions about their scope 1 and 2 as well. Do you see any sort of consistency between a lot of those questionnaires? Are people asking the same questions? Are they asking different questions? Is there difficulty that comes with answering those different questions?
I will tell you, it's all over the board. 3 years ago, we had 10 questionnaires that we got. This year alone, we've had 33 in Q1. So, we were going through this the other day because we are trying to come up with the standardized report that we can send out that provides information on standard questions. And we don't get standard questions. Some people want to know the complete cycle of their life cycle of their book. They want to know their carbon footprint by book. They want to know it. They just want to know what our carbon footprint is in general. They want to know what their carbon footprint is per quarter. They want to know it per, and what's in their carbon footprint could be very different. Depends on if it's print on demand or if it's coming from an offset and we're running, 30,000 books. They're all very different. And so there's so much variation with it. We have gone onto a software platform that has the abilities to take CDP and the SMED audits, the SEDEX audits, and we can upload our responses, and this EHS software system that we purchased, ESG side of it, will be able to answer some of the questions and pull some of that information out. But again, we're going to have to go back and take a look at what the response is, because even if it's all uploaded and AI is pulling out like answers to it, it may not be the answers that the customer is looking for with it. I hate to say this, but as an EHS and an ESG professional, I dislike regulations to the nth degree. But the one thing regulations will do is they will help condense some of the all over the board. When you think about it, we've got acronyms. There's so many different acronyms, and people are using different acronyms for different things. It's like alphabet soup. You have to try and figure out if their acronym is the same acronym that you're used to using with another customer, and it may be something completely different. Regulations, when they do step in, and I got to be honest with you, they're coming down the pike, they will at least fine tune some of that. So we are comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges or apples to heavens to Betsy bananas along the way.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, we've seen a major influx in regulations, and it's both at the state and federal level. So it's very interesting to hear you say that. It sounds like you all have come up with some sort of solution with the program that you've implemented. But I think it's clear, and I guess maybe my question for you is, would it be accurate to say that there is definitely an opportunity for more collaboration, both within the industry and in general, to sort of align these assessments and questionnaires and take some of the lift off of our partners?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes the questions that we get, and I'll be very honest, sometimes the publishers they're not even aware of exactly what they're looking for with it. They need to have something. And so some of them are very well educated and they know exactly what they need, and others are all over the board with it. So some of it is just helping educate people and businesses to what we can actually pull data from and what we can actually provide. And the ones that are, this is a pluck from air and we're not going to be able to do it this way. We talk about wanting to have scientific-based target numbers, SPDs. If we're going to do that, target-based numbers, it's going to have to be at a very flat level so that everybody's looking at the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, some high level standards that people can align with, the greenhouse gas protocol, and you mentioned the science-based targets. That's absolutely best practice. But when it comes to the request for that data and how do you calculate, there's a lot more nuances that go into all of that sort of data. So it's a really interesting perspective that you offer. Thanks, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd love to shift gears a little bit and then maybe focus on one of the other things that you mentioned, kind of related to that questionnaire. But we talked at a high level about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and what those look like for companies specifically, right? So across all of their operations, what their total carbon footprint is. Something that we've seen increasingly, both in the regulatory landscape and from, partner interest, is this idea of product carbon footprints, which you mentioned, and life cycle assessments for products. Breaking down the specific pieces from cradle to grave of either a book product or novelty product or whatever it is, and understanding basically from raw materials all the way through to the end of life, what the total impact is of that product. Could you speak a little bit to what you're seeing around this as well, and how decisions go into making or, analyzing those sorts of footprints and so on?
Yeah, and for us, the life cycle assessment, the cradle to grave, is a fairly new process that we have started. The data that you have to find for it's pretty in depth, but this is going to be an experience, and we're excited to be able to do this. We're going to have to look for the request. And this goes all the way from the paper that we're using to the carbon footprint to making sure that we're using specific tools to do the measurement with. And that's one of the reasons why we went with the EHS software program that we are working with. But, it's really focusing on the source of the paper source, then it's the energy mix, and it's the trim waste, and what are we doing with all of that, and how are we using that? And then taking it from there to what happens with the end user. Is the book being recycled? Does it go on a shelf? What are the consumers doing with it? So there's a piece in there that makes it a little bit difficult as well. We can take it from the start of when we get it from, the graphic designers, and it goes into our pre-press area. Then it's going to go from the press to the bindery area, and so on down the way until it gets into the warehouse. It's picked and pulled for our customers, be it a publishing house, or we've got some things that are print on demand, which can be a book or two and get out the door. And that's it. That's going to be a shorter cradle to grave process for us. But this whole life cycle assessment is something that is becoming a very big hot button. And it is something that a lot of the publishers are looking for at this point. So we're diving into it.
Oh, that's interesting. And I guess as it relates to the emissions, and so the LCA, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't just take into account the emissions, it's also the water and the intensity.
Absolutely.
Sorts of, yes.
Absolutely.
It's more of go ahead.
It's the manufacturing side of it. It's all of the materials, the adhesives. If it's a hardcover book, it's the cover board. It's, if it's got any type of saddle stitch, it's the sewing, it's the casing. All of that is combined with it. So, the inks are all a piece of it. All of that is going to be tied into the life cycle assessment.
Wow. And you mentioned that you're seeing some more interest around that. Is that, I'm curious where that's coming from, if you wouldn't mind sharing. And then
A lot of that is coming over from the EU, in all honesty, at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you seeing a shift, a sort of deprioritization of overall company emissions versus, product specific emissions, or are they kind of at an equal,
We have one very large customer that is looking for their carbon emissions by book, but we've only had one so far that's looking for that. The majority of them are looking for their product, not just, and some of them want to say just a product run, but the majority of them at this point are looking for their specific carbon footprint. They might ask for it by plant, because we have 6 print locations that are offset that we print different customers at different presses in different locations. And so at that point, we may have somebody that wants to know, in our Harrisonburg location, what is the carbon footprint in that specific book on that specific press? We can drill down into that data. It takes some time to get it. I always tell our team, it's going to take some time. We got to look it up, and we'll have to pull it. Now, with the software system that we bought that we're using now, it's going to be much easier. But again, it needs to be user friendly, and we're literally just rolling it out. So we'll get there.
Yeah.
It's going to take some time to figure out what the heck of course, it's garbage in, garbage out. So we have to be careful to make sure we're putting the right data in from the get-go.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear you all are very advanced in your sustainability journey to be looking at these things, for people who are maybe earlier on in their journey. I've partners who are maybe just beginning to understand their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and what scope 1, 2, and 3 even means. And, this is much farther down the line. Do you have any pieces of advice, or, would you mind kind of walking us through a little bit of your process in terms of how you decided to start conducting this, what the decisions and logistics are in terms of actually getting something like this done?
I can. So, and it can be really overwhelming if you're just stepping into the role. It is, or, you've made a decision as a business to be able to start to take a look at your carbon footprint. It's scary. Again, we talk about, it's looking at it at alphabet soup. And I can tell you that no matter what you do, the first step is the biggest step, and that's just moving forward. Scope 1 has to do with your heating, your maybe offsite and, fugitive emissions. Think about what are your direct emissions are going to be your scope 1. What are your direct, what's going out into the air? What are we using as far as water goes? And then go into the scope 2, which is really indirect. Things like the press operations, that would be considered, the energy piece of it is direct emissions that specific to a press would be an indirect one for you. Like post-press operations, it's gone from the press room and it's gone now over into the bindery area. The lighting, that's indirect. That's really falls underneath scope 2. And then scope 3 obviously is the value chain piece of it. Go after scope 2, go after scope 1, and then go after scope 3. So don't put them in order. Scope number 2, in all honesty, is I think, the easiest to track to begin with. And that's stepping in the right direction. And that's taking the first step.
Yeah, it can be incredibly daunting, but I think you're right. Just taking that initial step is the biggest thing, and mistakes will be made, but it's a learning process for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are going to be some estimates and some guesstimates. Now, as we move more towards a science-based target, we are ourselves, at least at Lakeside, will be more accountable. We have to be more accountable, and we have to be able to provide exactly where that came from. And that's fine. We're okay with that, but we're 3 years into the process as well. So the first year that they started asking about the carbon footprint, we actually hired a consultant that came in. And then after the consultant came in, we took a look at breaking down the report and saying, okay, this is what we can do. This is how we can handle it. And this is the direction we need to go to get there.
Now, I know we're jumping around a little bit, so I apologize for the mental whiplash, but I did want to, ask you if you could quickly give an explanation. You mentioned science-based targets. For anyone who doesn't know what those are, could you talk a little bit about what that specific process is?
Well, it's really a validation. It's an outside auditor coming in and validating exactly what your numbers are, where they came from, and how you came to the calculations that you did. Easiest explanation there is.
And when you say science-based, what science exactly is that based in?
Good question.
Thank you.
There are calculations that are provided that we use.
Okay. But they are meant to align with sort of the Paris Climate Accord and the greenhouse gas.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where those numbers came from to begin with.
So it sort of sets a standard for everyone who's looking to reduce their emissions to say, in order to all reach this goal by this year, we have to, everyone pitch in and contribute to this sort of initiative.
Yeah. Percentage based.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious how again, going back to sort of the life cycle assessments and the product carbon footprints, how those can help contribute. Obviously, a lot of that is a part of your scope 3. But when it comes to taking all of that data and meeting those reduction targets and making actual changes to your product and your operations, how can the insights that you gain from the carbon footprint or the life cycle assessment actually help you to influence your product design or material selection or, all those things that you have to take into consideration?
Well, when you think about it, there's a lot of things that we target, things like waste reduction, paper waste, that type of thing. How many, we touched base a little bit on typeset and maybe shrinking the typeset on the paper and which would eliminate more of the paper usage and more paper waste. Those things that are going to go into the landfills, and how do we eliminate that piece of it? We work very hard too. I've got some facilities that are zero landfill. And we've got others that have a goal of reducing their landfill waste by a certain percentage. They don't think they're going to get to zero, which is okay. But they believe that they can reduce their percentage of their landfill by 10% or 15%. So they take a look at those. We're working hard to get rid of shrink wrap. We're using pallet toppers instead. So instead of sending the things out all shrink wrapped and you've got all the plastic that you're dealing with, you're looking at a pallet topper and banding that is specific to that size pallet. Instead of plastic tape, looking at paper tape and glue instead, and an adhesive instead of plastic. All things like that can affect it. So those are things that we've been looking at. And those are, when you think about plastic in the landfill, it's not going to go away. It's that those are not, we want to recycle that. We work with a company called TerraCycle that picks up a lot of our waste, and they recycle it, and they will make furniture, and they'll make tables, and they donate a lot of different things. So as we're working to reduce our landfill, we are moving it over to the TerraCycle company, which is coming in. They literally come and pick up the boxes, and then they handle the recycling of it.
Wow. That's incredible that you all do that. I think, again, it's interesting to talk about sort of those design and operational decisions that you make for alternative materials. Oftentimes in the past, they've been seen as more of a nice to have or part of the corporate social responsibility, right? But as we're in this new landscape with regulations and things increasingly requiring this, there's a cost avoidance piece to it too, right? There's additional fees that you have to pay. I'm wondering, for people who aren't familiar, if you wouldn't mind going into a little bit about EPR and some of the regulations that we're seeing now around this.
So, and again, the regulations make it a little bit more difficult, and there's more accountability with it. But it's important that we follow through with it, because it in all honesty, the regulations are there to help streamline processes. They are there to hold the accountability, so that things like, you think about, and this has nothing to do with the printing industry, but think about fast fashion and where the fabric ends up, and the type of material that's in the fabric that doesn't break down, and it's not going to be absorbed into the community or whatever, into the waste. It's important with our papers that we look at what our paper is made of. Are we looking at books that we're going to now do on recycled paper? Because you can use recycled paper, which would affect the life cycle assessment as well. And it kind of ties into some of those things. So the regulations are there to help us fine tune our processes. They're not always cheap, and sometimes they're difficult. We talk about EDUR and trying to geotag a tree and from a farm that who knows, many of our paper mills said they simply couldn't do it. And how are they going to handle that side of it? Those regulations are not going to go away. They're going to get more stringent, and they're going to be stronger in the long run. So it's figuring out how you can adapt to that if you need be necessary. We have a product now that we have called Print Relief, which is we can buy carbon credits. We get carbon credits, but the print relief is by book, and it's planting trees for the amount of paper that's used when the book is printed. And so there are different options on things that help balance those regulations out.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. I think sometimes we get bogged down in the alphabet soup. I know Irene is putting a glossary, I believe, in the chat. So if there's any terms, throughout this call that people are lost in, there should be some definitions there. But, just to quickly clarify, when EPR is extended producer responsibility regulation. So we've seen a number of regulations come out in Canada, in the US, and in the EU that place penalties and taxes on any sort of plastic and packaging waste being sent into the state. Yep. And that's from business to business to consumer. So, there is absolutely a cost of operating here now that did not exist maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah. It's the corporate sustainability reporting directive that's coming out of the EU as well. We will end up having to adopt to those types of things. It's in the US, it's if we sell it in Europe, we're going to be reporting on it eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we think about potential solutions to some of these problems, you touched on some really great initiatives that you all are working on. Are you hearing other things, potential opportunities for publishers and printers and people to kind of explore when we look at sustainable innovation? Whether that's in the US or other markets?
Well, for us, our Print Relief program is a really exciting program for us. And I touched just a little bit about it, but it is literally by books sold, it's trees planted. And so it's not only is it a feel good feeling, but it's the right thing to do. We are FS certified. We're all in the States anyway. And we're all about not deforesting and making sure that we're taking care of our forest and taking care of our environment for not, the past and the present, but for the future as well. And so Print Relief for us is a great program to have. The other thing is to take a look at things that we can do. How do we reduce the waste in the paper so that we're using less paper to begin with? And, do we need to take a look at the typeset and maybe the fonts need to be a little bit smaller on a page, but is that going to work with the consumer? And, you have to look at those markets as well. So there's a lot of different things in the mix when you take a look at what you can do and what you can change along the way.
Yeah. So sometimes, it's not even trying to find the next best thing. It's more so just refining the processes and materials that we have in place and understanding how we can, enhance them and make them more sustainable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to that point, I'd love to dive a little bit more into the printing itself and talk about your thoughts on digital printing and the sort of increase in popularity that we've seen with that, print on demand. How that impact emissions in a positive way or overall footprint?
Well, when we really dove into digital printing versus an offset, I will tell you that they are very, very close just because it takes more energy with the digital printing side of it. The other side of it, though, with the digital side is there's less waste. You're using less inks, you're using less paper. So there's less waste when it comes to that side of it. Digital printing can do small runs, but we can't do really big runs with digital printing. Meaning, if we're printing 10,000 books, we can't run that on the digital press. It has to be run on offset. So there's some balances and some checks and weights that we have to take a look at with all of that processes. The digital printing is definitely typically smaller runs to begin with it. But again, that creates less waste. It creates less ink. You're using less paper. So we've got some positives with it as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And as it relates to kind of understanding both within the printing space and looking at alternative materials, what are some of the biggest barriers to entry for people looking to kind of explore those? Is it cost? Is it availability? Is it not performing the way prior materials have?
I would say that it's probably more, availability. There's a lot of availability when it comes to digital printing. Lakeside is purchasing another one that we're putting into a digital press that we're putting into Harrisonburg because we're seeing more and more demand. And quite frankly, that's where the industry is headed in general. But I don't know if we'll ever really get away from the offset side of it just because of the massive quantity in the size of the runs that you can have with the offset side of it.
That makes sense. I guess it is encouraging to hear too that, the sort of from the emissions perspective or the overall footprint, digital and offset are pretty comparable. So we don't have to feel
they very much are very comparable.
Yeah. And in the past, for as long as we have. But, I think as we continue to think about the increase in digital and the quality, there's absolutely opportunity there from a sustainability perspective.
Yeah. The other side of that is in the digital side of it, you can do print on demand. So you can do smaller quantities and get it to the customer faster. It can be shipped, directly to the consumer versus having it going from, we printed 10,000 books. Now they're going to the fulfillment center. They're going from our fulfillment center to another fulfillment center. When you look at the life cycle assessment, the print on demand is definitely going to be shorter than it will be when we're printing on an offset press.
That's interesting. Yeah. So the print on demand is really ultimately what it comes down to when one is beating out the other. Interesting. And that's
Absolutely.
something you're seeing sort of an increase in popularity in?
Well, we just purchased in January another business that is all print on demand for a specific reason, because that is definitely growing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great to hear. Very encouraging. I want to be mindful of time, and I know that I'm sure there'll be some questions in the chat and from Irene. So, I'll just ask a few more questions, Susan, if you don't mind me continuing.
Sure, that's fine.
I guess just more broadly, as we look at all of the topics that we've covered today and been jumping all around, I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Are there other sorts of environmental initiatives or programs underway that we maybe haven't discussed that you think are important to highlight in this conversation about sustainability?
Well, ESG and sustainability and really figuring out your carbon footprint it's a big project, and it's very scary. Sometimes it's mind-blowing as to where do I even begin? The one thing I can just say about it is take the first step forward. First of all, learn the processes and understand what's included in scope 1, what's included in scope 2, and what's included in scope 3, and then just get started with it. Literally, on the scope 2 side of it, start looking at your electric bill, start looking at the water bills. That's where that data is coming from. We got a lot of this information from our controllers. And then we could figure out from there what's going into our landfills. Well, what are they hauling away from us? What in the inks? So how much ink are we using? And figuring it out from there. And then you can really calculate out what your carbon footprint is, what the energy is that you're using. That's all coming off of your bills. So it doesn't have to be as intimidating as it sounds. It's just taking that first step in the initiative to get started with it.
Interesting. Outside of emissions, would you say that there's one, or maybe my question for you is, what are one or two areas that you think are really either important now or you kind of expect to be increasingly important in the years to come that you would sort of advise publishers and printers and partners to look at or to think about?
I will tell you that I really believe that the life cycle assessment is going to be a big thing coming down the pike. It is. I think consumers, and I think this holds true of almost every product that we have. We really, and this is a bit generational, is that the younger generations want to know where this is going to end up in the long run. Is it going to end up in some landfill somewhere? Is it going to sit on the shores in India? Or, I mean, what's happened? Our cell phones is a perfect example of that. Where do they go after we're done using them? Where does a book go after it's done? I think that that's going to be an important thing. And I do think that more and more people are going to be looking for things like that. One of the new initiatives that you see with us is we have edge printing now, right? On our books, we have a lot of customers that are asking for edge printing. That's very pretty. It looks wonderful on the books. That's going to affect the life cycle of the book. People are taking those books and instead of putting them in their shelves with the spine to the back so you can read what it is, they're turning it around because of the design and they like that design and they want to, it becomes a fashion piece or a decorative piece on their shelf versus the way it was before with it. So, but then you have to remember that means we're using more inks. And so there's offsets with all of the different things that happen with it. But when it comes to the environmental side of it, I think the life cycle assessment is going to be the biggest thing coming down the pipe because I think people want that information and they're going to request it more and more as they understand it.
Interesting. Yeah. It's definitely something that I think I've been hearing more about and I'm very intrigued to see where it goes with that. I think that's a great prediction. I guess I'll end with one last question. And I heard this phrasing in a webinar I went to a little while back, and I really liked it. So I'm gonna apply it here. But if you could wave a magic wand and create meaningful progress as you would define it to be in the next few years in the publishing industry when it relates to sustainability, what does that look like for you?
More consistent reporting on in a platform that helps everybody level set on the same. So they're asking the same questions in the same type of way, meaning it. Again, acronyms, so many different acronyms are different for different people. If it's all level set, then we're comparing everything the same along with our competition. And that's very different now. We use our sustainability report as part of our sales report. And it's important. And if it's different looking or where we've got different data than somebody else's sustainability report, we're not even reporting the exact same things. And so there are some differences there with it. As people get more knowledgeable in it and they have better understanding of it, I think that that's going to help level set some of that information and they'll be able to digest that data better. I see we have some questions coming up.
Yeah. Wow. I've seen a few comments pop up in the chat. Susan, I think that was a great sort of mic drop moment there. But again, I want to double check with Irene, leave some time for questions from the audience. Did you want to kind of take over in reading some of those out, or did you want to have audience members voice them themselves?
I think we have some in the chat. Well, why don't I read out some of the ones that we have in the chat? I did ask the first question. So my question is quick, simple, and easy. Do you think there will be more demand in the future of customers looking to include labeling that calls out carbon emissions, similar to the way that customers look for FSC labeling today?
I absolutely do. The one thing to remember with it is more ink. It's more paper. So we have to remember that as well. But I will be very surprised. And to be honest, Irene, we have seen some requests that have looked for it. They are not demanding it yet, but they've asked if we would be able to do that. So I will be very surprised if that doesn't come further down the pipe.
Wonderful, thank you. Joseph asks, is there any research that shows how much the carbon footprint of a title could be greatly reduced by printing domestically instead of offshore?
Well, one of the big things with that is the transportation and the shipping that you have with the product that's coming from offshore back into the States. But I don't have the dollars and cents of it for you, Joseph, to be able to give you that information.
And then Simona asks, and if anyone wants to read your question instead of me vocalizing it, happy to do that too. Simona asks, can you speak about EcoVadis climate partnerships and similar companies that some publishers are partnering with? How would these companies fit with scope reporting?
Well, they fit very well. So we report into Ecovatus. It is a software system that, again, they give you scores depending on, and they look at all of the different things with ESG. So E is the environmental side of it. G is the governance side of it. S is the sustainability piece of it. They look at all of those different things, and we look at the governance side of it. That has to do with child labor. It has to do with human relations. It has to do with communities. It falls into there's a bunch of different things that are in there, but it'll ask very specific questions and each one of those categories. And then it gives you a score, A, B, C, D, and it'll also give you an F. And then you can work towards improving your scores depending on what your answers are. And sometimes it's as simple as uploading a document that has your letterhead on it versus a pile. I uploaded a pile. I'll give you an example of it. I uploaded our child labor law, our child labor requirements, or our policy on it, but it didn't have our letterhead on the policy, and it didn't have our name into the policy, so we didn't get credit for it. So then they'll let you know that they'll ping you back and say, in this category you got a C, and the C is because you're missing X, Y, Z. You can go back in, make sure that the poly's been transferred onto the right letterhead, into the right documentation, make sure it's been reviewed when it was supposed to have been reviewed, upload it again, and then your scores will start to increase exponentially.
Thank you. Actually, I have another question that kind of ties into the question that Joseph asked before about printing domestically versus printing offshore, and it also goes back to my question about customers starting to look for labeling that calls out carbon emissions per book. So with digital printing is a huge focus in publishing and printing, and one of the appeals is that digital printing has this great potential to reduce inventory overhead. So if carbon footprint per book is, so like, how do I phrase my question? So is a carbon footprint per book measurement accurate in this scenario when you're doing digital print, when part of that larger picture is weighing that benefit against a situation that didn't happen because then you didn't print it offset, maybe you didn't print it offshore? Is that labeling? Would that labeling or would that measurement be an accurate depiction of, what that situation, printing digitally, truly?
It's not going to. It's going to give you a good guesstimate. You're right. It can't be 100% accurate. And the reason for that is even with Lakeside Book, we calculate out off the press. We'll calculate in the binding area, but then we don't calculate if it's sat on a shelf in the storage fulfillment site and how long it sat on that shelf. And you think about the lighting, you think about the heat, the cooling, the energy, the time, that's not calculated into that carbon footprint. So there are some differences there with it. And we won't be able to calculate that out versus a digital side of it. I can take it from A to Z. If it's on specifically POD and it's going out the door in 2 or 3 days, it is what it is. And we can put that on that book and have that be certifiably correct. But I cannot do that on an offset that's going into a storage area.
Yeah.
I can give it to a certain point, and then that's going to be the end date of the footprint. That was a good question.
Thank you. Do we have other questions from the audience? I don't want to monopolize all the questions. I do have one more question, but I can leave. Someone else has another one. Okay, my other question is, do you see a lot of collaboration between vendors and material suppliers to unify on testing methods and data collection and how and the terminology that you're using to define such things? Or do you see that this is driven more by customers, which in this case is publishers?
This is driven by the customers.
Okay.
For sure. And it's, the UK, the EU is looking for something completely different than they're looking for in Canada, is looking for something completely different than if it's a United States based one. So it's kind of it's working on tying all of those different things in. Now, EcoVadis, quite frankly, I mean, that's a big help for us. The CDP, neither Bryce, who is my sustainability specialist, and I like them at all, because it's a long questionnaire and it's a long documentation that you have to have, and the information that you're entering into it takes forever. But at least that's the two platforms that we work with that at least do some of the level setting. And now with this EHS software that we have, or the sustainability piece that we have stepped into, we can upload our responses from EcoVadis and from CDP, and it'll generate a report that we can send to the customer from that data. So we're not re-entering things. The AI piece of it is going to be extremely helpful for us.
That's excellent. Any other questions from the audience? If this was live, I'd be walking around with a microphone. Well, if not, I will end with a little bit. So this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you both so much again for leading us into such a thoughtful conversation. When I first started doing these programs, I didn't know that much about sustainability, and I'll admit it was confusing for me. It was a lot of this what do you call it, the alphabet soup of sustainability, and it's still alphabet soup for me. But then I find the more that I have these conversations about sustainability, not even though I am not the one having this conversation directly, which I am not here, but even when I am listening to these conversations about sustainability between people like you, the more I hear this over and over again, the more this information sticks in my head, and the easier it becomes for my brain to think about things in terms of sustainability. And the way that I see it is that it's like building a habit. It's like exercise. And if you have like a trainer that tells you, hey, do this, pick it up this way. This is what this movement is called. Hearing this over and over again starts to build that habit. And it really helps. So thank you both for having this conversation here with us today. Thank you to our audience for joining us in this conversation today. Really appreciate it. We all build this community together. And I said in the beginning, I don't think sustainability thrives in a silo, and all of us being here helps take us out of our own individual silos. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Claudia and Susan. Our next event is our Bingo Book Bash on Wednesday, April 29th, which is free if you're a member. And if you're not a member, I think you really should be. And our next program is on Wednesday, May 20th at McMillan at 120 Broadway, where we will discuss the use of AI in publishing. And I hope to see you all at the upcoming events. Let's give a round of applause for our speakers tonight. Thank you again so much for leading us in this conversation and helping personally for helping me build my sustainability habits. We love to have you here.
And happy to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Irene, for having us. Always a pleasure. So
have a great night, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.